Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is Cade, and today we have a brand new episode for our favorite movies series. And for today, we are joined by a brand new guest for the channel, and that guest is my friend Emily Colangelo. Emily, hi, thank you so much for being here.
The pleasure is all mine. Thank you.
Oh, good to have you here. And for today, we're actually going to be doing something a little different. Emily doesn't really have a certain ranking for all these movies, so instead, we're just going to be going through them by the year. So first up, we have Playtime from 1967. For this one to be one of your favorite films of all time, what is it about the story of this movie that makes it good enough to crack your top five?
I kind of realized just now that I maybe this wasn't the best one to start with, just out of sheer lack of story or plot, but I guess that's what makes it special to me is that it's more of a visual spectacle than, something you have to follow and latch onto certain characters to really understand. But yeah, it's such an oddity. I went into it totally blind, and like my friend who recommended it to me was like, it's like Where's Waldo, but everyone's Waldo, and that was just really intriguing to me, so I had to give it a watch, and I ended up exhausted by the end, but it has a special place in my heart for sure.
Well, and like we said, this movie came out in 1967. And, as someone who's part of a younger generation, do you think that there's a lot of value in younger audiences and filmmakers and creatives watching older films such as this?
Oh, of course. I love watching interviews with directors today that I'm a fan of and just hearing what they have to say and about like the films that inspired them and the directors that inspired them. It's interesting to kind of trace the lineage back to, a certain period or a certain cinematic niche, I guess, that, it's like, oh, that totally makes sense. I can see where they came from. So yeah, I it doesn't it this film doesn't feel that old to me, like visually, but maybe I'm just projecting, I guess, in the sense that I've seen a lot of films visually like it, but there's something about the time period of this particular film that is just especially interesting to me. 1960s Paris, and I don't know, it's valuable visually to me in lieu of a compelling plot line. I think it's something everyone should give some time.
Yeah, and regarding Jacques Tati, the star of the film, he's not just the star, he's also the movie's director. And when you look at this movie from both an acting perspective and a directing perspective, is the way that he's able to balance both these roles something that you really appreciate most about this movie?
I have so much respect for that, just in the sense that as a self-proclaimed control freak, sometimes you have ideas that like you can only trust yourself to pull off. Whether he was directing, it was like, no, it has to be like this, and I have to act it out. Or as an actor, it's like, no, I need it to look like this, so I need to direct it. Yeah, I have a lot of respect for actors slash directors, and in this case, on such a grand scale, the visions of this film, like I can't even imagine what it took to pull off and, not only not be behind the camera, but to kind of take a front seat, but also a back seat and acting in it, just being right in the middle of it. So
Yeah, well, now for the next movie on your list, we have another film from 1967, and that is The Graduate. So, for a movie that, just like the previous film, Older Than You Are, has it always been one of your favorite films of all time? And if so, what was your experience like when you first watched this movie?
I don't think I liked this movie when I first watched it. I want to say the first time I watched it, I was probably in the middle of high school. Just as a movie channel surfer, I just stumbled, I just happened upon it, and any Simon and Garfunkel lover, sure, yeah, I think I owe it to myself to watch this. So I did. I think it's one of those things where I'm sure there are many books and films that people say this about, but it's kind of one of those things you have to watch at certain periods of your life to, take different things from it. You're not going to understand certain things until you get to that age or life period. Yeah, I guess I can pretty safely say I didn't love it, but now that I've gotten older and am a graduate, yeah, you take different things from it.
Yeah, and this movie also works as both, a romantic comedy and as a drama. And as a fan, what do you appreciate most about how the movie blends both drama with the rom-com elements?
I think this movie's unintentionally funny. It has its moments, but for the most part, it's just every second you can find to laugh to yourself about just a quip somebody makes. It's kind of relieving from the heaviness and the intensity of the interpersonal drama that is just constantly drowning in. It's yeah, I'm normally not like super drama fan or a super romantic, but I think it's so timeless in the sense that it's still funny and still that's so true. People said that to me when I graduated. It's yeah, I don't know. I guess that's one thing about it. Like its timelessness that I can really appreciate across genre and handling multiple genres as well.
Yeah, and Dustin Hoffman's obviously had a very long career. It's lasted for over 50 years. When you look at his performance in this movie as compared to some of his later performances, do you consider this to be a good example of just how great an actor he's always been?
This might be the best example I would think. Sometimes I've come to accept this with a lot of characters that have especially affected me in the films I've watched over the course of my life. Sometimes they don't have to be a good character. It as annoying as he is, like I can't help but owe it to Dustin Hoffman's skill as an actor to annoy me and to be like, what are you doing? And like you want to reach through the screen and shake him and be like, stop, what are you doing? No, you can't. So yeah, I think this is a great example of just affinity through annoyance almost as such a chaotic character as he is in this film. It's like I said, it's timeless. It's just as convincing as it was when I was in high school as it is now. It still seems ridiculous to me, but that balance or imbalance maybe of perspectives on adulthood and maybe still kind of having one foot in youth or maybe not childhood but young adulthood. It's he handles both perfectly. So perfectly imperfectly maybe.
Well, now moving on to the next movie on your list, we have The Darjeeling Limited from 2007. So this movie definitely has three great leads. We have Owen Wilson, Adrian Brody, and Jason Schwartzman. And for a movie that relies a lot on the characters and their interactions with each other, are the performances part of why this movie works so well for you?
Yeah, these three are just some of the goats of Wes Anderson's usual suspects across his filmography. There are three brothers, they're all different, and I think each brother just has something about himself that is just something that only, Jason Schwartzman or Adrian Brody or Owen Wilson can pull off in their own ways. I think they're perfectly cast and they're each facing some figurative or literal crisis or hardship. They don't look like brothers, maybe, but there's something really unique about like sibling relationships that they just pull off exceptionally. I think Wes Anderson pulls off family dynamics really well, and some may say that other films like Fantastic Mr. Fox or The Royal Tenenbaums showcase this a little more effectively. I really think that between the casting and just the general story, it takes first place for me.
Well, and a large portion of this movie takes place on a train, the titular Darjeeling Limited. And for you personally, do you consider the train a character of its own based on how much time and interaction and development is spent between the characters on this train?
Yeah, whether it's a character or a symbol, I think it's of course. I know they're not like technically on the train for the entirety of the film, but it's so central to just this ongoing theme of hurtling aimlessly towards or like even away from something you can't quite understand yet, as each of the brothers is just kind of dealing with their own problems individually and together with themselves or with each other. It took me a while, and it still does, like when I don't watch this for a long enough time, to really understand like why they're even there, why they're even on it, where they're even going. But it just continues, but eventually the tension just reaches a boiling point. They get kicked off, and it seems like at that point you kind of grapple with like the grief they're feeling. And I'm tempted to say, to me, it's a symbol of just how the world continues on with or without you, no matter how straddled with grief or tension or your own selfishness you are. It's, yeah. And though it takes probably more than half of the film to understand it, it's a very compelling symbol that I appreciate.
Yeah, and this is one of the many films by Wes Anderson, and he's also popular for making films such as, like you mentioned, Fantastic Mr. Fox, Isle of Dogs, The Grand Budapest Hotel. And looking at this movie and some of his other work, what do you appreciate most about his style as a director and as a storyteller?
Maybe my biggest compliments are other people's biggest criticisms that, I've heard, his films look good, but they don't really carry much weight, like what I'm always laughing at like a tweet that I saw where it's like, what are Wes Anderson films like even about? Does anybody know? But I just think as a director and trying to understand him as a person, his visions are so intricate and just so meticulously constructed, like figuratively or literally. His sets are just incredible. And so, whether it's, the script and the writing or his visual sets, there's no one like him in the game. What can I say?
Yeah, he is pretty good at what he does. Moving on to the next movie on your list, we have Frank from 2014. Now, when it comes to the overall concept for this movie, what is it that you find most engaging about it as an audience member?
To be completely honest with you, I could not wrap my head around the concept of this film upon first explanation or recommendation at all. I really had to, this is like one case where you're not going to get it until you watch it. I really had to give it the time and attention. I'm so glad that I did. I think this is the most recent favorite and probably surprising favorite on my list today. I guess the premise of, like a group of oddballs trying to find community with other oddballs is always intriguing to me in one way or another. But in this instance, I guess I was surprised by how, they didn't really find anything in each other than problems. I guess everyone can relate, or maybe not everyone. Maybe everyone can relate in one way or another. You kind of stumble across a group of people, or maybe just one person that you think is gonna get you, and you're like, oh, surely I'm not too weird for these people, but it just doesn't work out, and that's fine. But in this film, it just seems like every character is, for every ounce of quirkiness and how funny they are, they're just as very damaged and unstable, and there's just a lot of friction between the oddities. And by the end, it's just disaster for everyone. And it's really not as heartwarming or happy ending-y as it might seem at times. If you can even figure out what's going to happen next, there's really no telling. But I think that reality and unpredictability is really valuable here. I appreciate.
Yeah, and when it comes to Michael Fassbender, who portrays the character Frank, the director of this movie, Lenny Abrahamson, he said that Fassbender was actually very comfortable wearing that head and that he actually enjoyed acting in it. And when it comes to Fassbender's performance, do you enjoy the way that he conveys emotion without us having to see his face?
I love it. I totally respect that. It's really funny how much I loved Michael Fassbender in this movie. It seems like almost a waste to have him hidden behind that giant paper mache dome for like 95% of the movie. But to me, if anything, I think it's an extra test or maybe like show of your skill as an actor to be such a compelling character without even having shown your face, or for most of the film anyway. I'm sure that there are many actors who are really very shy and reclusive in reality or in their everyday life, but having an opportunity like this to disappear, be obscured by your role, like to this extent, may make it easier, but it also can make them really shine in ways you may not expect. Frank even says, oh, even real faces are weird too. It says, oh, would it help if I said my facial expressions out loud? And that was so funny to me, because even when he's doing that, it's so endearing and unintentionally funny, maybe.
Well, and this movie was also made on a relatively lower budget. It only cost $1 million. And as someone who enjoys film and creativity, do you get more entertainment value out of lower budget movies? And if so, do you think that this movie specifically works better as a lower budget film?
Yeah, the budget really seems fitting for this movie. I guess the entire plot just kind of seems to be about just scraping by and the creative struggle and, to stay true to your artistic visions on a budget. And yeah, knowing that, it kind of gives an authenticity to the rundown cabin they're recording out of and the tiny hotel room they're cramped in, and they're all crowding into this barely functional van that they're touring in, and John wasting his nest egg savings just for another month. Yeah, the real budget of this film just gives it a kind of authenticity that I really appreciate. Not that budget always means much for the quality or goodness of the film, I suppose, what you take away from it, but with the right plot or story or theme, it can make for a more authentic one. And this is a perfect example.
Yeah, I agree. Well, now moving on to the final movie on your list, we have Phantom Thread from 2017. Obviously, we're not ranking these movies, but just out of curiosity, if you had to put three of these in your top three, would this movie make your top three? And if so, what is it about this movie that you enjoy most for it to make your top five at least?
I honestly think this might be my number one of all time, really, at the moment. These things are ever fluctuating. I guess I didn't really realize it until I was rewatching my pick. I know I put them in chronological order for the very reason that I wasn't able to definitively rank them on favoritism. But every time I've watched this film since it's come out, it's just stuck with me for weeks and months afterwards. I hope my speechlessness or my verbal stumbling is a testament to how good it is, or how I'm still trying to understand it and grapple with it. The character dynamics in this film are just some of Paul Thomas Anderson's best, in my opinion. I'm also very heavily biased by Johnny Greenwood's soundtrack. I think it really complements like the sensory beauty that this film is really defined by for me. It's almost ASMR-ish in some senses. It's just beautiful, audibly, visually, interpersonally. It's beguiling. It's beautiful. It's my favorite.
Yeah, and speaking of Paul Thomas Anderson, are you a big fan of his work?
Yeah, I was late to the Paul Thomas Anderson game, admittedly. It was really hard for me to exclude a lot of his other films, most notably, I'm sure many people would agree, like There Will Be Blood and The Master.
Boogie Nights?
Yeah, of course. Of course. I could make a whole separate list, like just going on about his other films. I tried to stick with one for the purpose of this.
Well, when it comes to this movie, though, what do you appreciate most about not just his directing, but also his writing when it comes to the overall execution of the movie?
Yeah, I want to take a second to kind of shout out a book that I'm constantly referring to whenever I watch any of his films. I don't think it's fully comprehensive as of today in the present, but it does include Phantom Thread. So yeah, it's called Paul Thomas Anderson Masterworks by Adam Naiman. It has a great forward by the Safdie brothers. So anyone who's interested in Paul Thomas Anderson or is already a huge fan, I think that's a must own. It's easy for me, and I learn something new every time I open it. I most recently I learned that Phantom Thread was his most critically and commercially successful film since There Will Be Blood, which makes perfect sense to me. I think it really stands out against so many factors of his other films. Most importantly, just as such a compelling like period piece. You're in like 1950s Britain, and there's just this aristocratic air to it that I was unfamiliar with his ability to capture in his other films until watching this one. Yeah, it's a quiet, very quiet film, but it's so compelling in the sense that you really can't buy happiness, and this close up on an aristocratic fashion house is just case in point. No level of richness, figuratively or literally, or sterility or order that they try to keep, it seems to comfort anyone in this film, and it just ends up intensifying the tension. It's also funny unintentionally in certain moments, and I love it. I love everything about it.
Well, and just regarding the star of this movie, Daniel Day-Lewis, he's very well known for his method acting. And for this movie, he definitely immersed himself in the role by engaging in all these different activities. And that included learning dressmaking for at least a year. And when it comes to his approach with that as a method actor, to just fully embody the characters that he plays, do you think that anyone but him could have portrayed the character of Reynolds as good as he did?
I've actually heard a lot of comments and criticism from the many people I've forced this film upon that Daniel Day-Lewis doesn't really disappear into this role as effectively as he has in the past. Probably everyone's ideal example is Daniel Plainview in There Will Be Blood or Bill the Butcher in Gangs of New York, which is also a fantastic film. That he's really like the closest to his true self here. Is he really acting? But I get it. I understand for how revered he is as one of the greatest actors, probably of all time. I'm sure very few people disagree with me there.
He's the very first actor to win 3 Oscars for the lead actor category.
When it comes to what's on his mantle, I don't think there's any arguing there. I think it makes for a really convincing like final form in his last film before retirement. I've heard he's trying to step back out, but to me, this is a great way to bow out of such an impressive career. And this also gives, total props to Vicky Krieps and Leslie Manville for going literally toe to toe with him. I always think of that quote from Steven Spielberg about his interpretation of There Will Be Blood and how he can't wash off. I think he said I can't wash off the character of Daniel Plainview. And to me, while I agree with that, I also find it really difficult to escape the glare, the over the spectacles glare of Reynolds Woodcock here. He's haunted me. I can't complain.
I agree. I think he's very great in this movie too. All right, well, I think that that's the end of this interview. Emily, thank you so much for being here.
Pleasure's all mine. I appreciate it.
Guys, thank you so much for listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you all again next time.